My name is Evelyn Monroe. I'm a music historian, the kind of person who spends hours in dusty archives, reading liner notes, and tracking down forgotten composers the world never applauded. I study echoes, faint imprints left behind in sound. I've always believed that music remembers things we forget. But nothing in my quiet, methodical life prepared me for what I found, or rather, what found me. They say we live only once. That time is a river flowing in one direction, dragging everything behind it. Childhood, love, memory, loss. But I've stood in still water. I've felt time hold its breath. And I know now, some stories don't follow the river. Some stories are the river. Mine begins not with a person, but with a sound. A melody. It wasn't famous. It wasn't even named. Just a fragment of piano, floating through a scratchy old recording in a forgotten corner of a music exhibit. But when I heard it, something in me cracked open. A kind of homesickness for a place I had never been, and someone I had never met. I don't know how to explain what happened after that, only that I followed the feeling, through miles, through decades, through logic and disbelief. I followed it all the way to a lakeside hotel, and into the arms of a man who existed in the wrong time. Or maybe I did. What I'm about to tell you isn't fiction. It isn't science either. It's something else entirely. Call it fate. Call it madness. Call it the echo of a love too strong to die quietly. All I know is this. He was waiting for me. Long before I ever arrived. I never expected to find anything that day. I was supposed to be doing field research, cataloging post-war piano recordings at the University of Michigan's temporary museum annex. It was the kind of quiet, meticulous work I'd always enjoyed. I was alone, as usual. My students were off for spring break. The curator was behind a desk thumbing through donation forms, and the air smelled of aging paper and linseed oil. The room was lined with display cases, glass panes dulled by time and fingerprints. Dust floated through thin shafts of afternoon light, like snow inside a dream. I walked slowly, reading brass plaques that named forgotten musicians, scanning cracked album sleeves that had once graced living room turntables in the 1940s and 50s. And then I heard it. A single piano note, software clean, then another and another, falling like rain. The melody was fragile, tentative. Not in the way of a poor performance, but in the way someone might play if they were confessing something. It wasn't just beautiful, it was lonely. The kind of tune that doesn't try to impress you. It just aches in your chest, gently. I turned toward the sound. It came from an old Victor phonograph display, tucked in the back of the room beneath a Sound of the Past placard. The speaker crackled, the waxy sound warbling like it had to fight its way out of the past. But the moment the tune settled into its main phrase, something in me stilled. It was like someone had called my name, but without words. I stood there, completely still, my fingertips tingling, heart pacing quietly but insistently. The rest of the world faded. I wasn't in the museum anymore. I wasn't even in my own body. I was somewhere else, or maybe someone. A woman's voice pulled me back.
That one gets a lot of reaction,
said the curator, a kind-eyed woman in her 60s. She came over, arms folded, watching me with the kind of gentle curiosity librarians always seem to carry. Do you know the composer? I asked, my voice thinner than I expected. She shook her head.
It's listed as unpublished, unknown, but we think it might have been Charles Marchand. He played piano at a lakeside hotel up north back in the 50s. Someone found the recording in a box of unsorted reels. It's never been confirmed, though.
Charles Marchand? I repeated the name like it had weight in my mouth. She smiled, already walking back to her desk.
Funny story, actually. He disappeared, vanished one summer. People say he walked into the lake and never came out, or that he just left everything behind. Romantic nonsense. Musicians.
But I didn't laugh, because I had already stopped listening. The melody had changed something in me, subtly but completely, like turning a kaleidoscope and suddenly seeing the pattern for the first time. I left the exhibit with his name echoing in my mind. Charles Marchand. I didn't know why or how or what I was about to find, but one thing was certain. That wasn't the last time I would hear that song. And it wasn't the first time I'd known his name. I didn't go home that night. I drove north. It wasn't logical. Nothing about it was. But the moment I typed Charles Marchand into the university's audio archive database, the world tilted slightly on its axis. There was a note in the database beside the recording, recovered from donated reels. Believed to originate from the Grand Ledge Hotel, 1955. That was enough. I filled a travel bag with a few clothes, my field journal, and the only vintage tape player I trusted. Before dawn broke, I was already cruising along the edge of Lake Michigan, with ghost music humming in my mind. The Grand Ledge Hotel wasn't on any commercial booking sites. I had to look it up through old historical records. Nestled on the edge of a quiet inland lake, Ledgewater, it once served as a summer haven for artists, writers, and musicians between the 1920s and early 1960s. It had since become a semi-private estate, still intact, partially open for historical tours. When I arrived, the lake was veiled in soft mist. The gravel drive crunched under my tires as I parked in front of the aging structure. It wasn't grand in the modern sense, but it had soul. Turreted roofs and white-painted balconies wrapped around its frame like a lingering embrace. Ivy clung to stone. The windows, arched and mullioned, reflected the golden haze of morning in a kind of solemn reverence. I stood there for a while, just watching. It felt familiar. I approached the front desk, where an elderly man greeted me. He introduced himself as Howard, the caretaker. A retired music professor, he now maintained the estate and led occasional history tours. I introduced myself, mentioned my research, and asked if he knew anything more about Charles Marchand. His reaction wasn't what I expected. He stiffened slightly, his smile softening into something more pensive.
Charles,
he murmured, like the name had been tucked away in a cedar drawer for decades.
Yes, I remember him. My mother used to bring me here when I was a boy. He played piano in the lounge every evening, always wore the same brown suit, polished shoes, never married, quiet type.
Do you remember the last time you saw him? I asked. Howard nodded slowly.
July 1955. He played a melody he'd never played before. Sad but beautiful. After that, no one saw him again. Left behind his coat and everything. Some folks said he ran off. Others...
He hesitated.
Others said he vanished. Just faded.
I felt a shiver at the base of my spine. Do you still have that piano? He smiled faintly.
In the lounge, down that corridor, to the left.
I didn't walk. I drifted. Each step toward the lounge felt increasingly surreal, like I was moving through layers of gauze. The hallway was lined with photographs, sepia-toned, framed in brass. Some featured summer parties, couples in white gloves, musicians tuning instruments beneath paper lanterns. I paused beside one and gasped. There he was, leaning against the piano, head tilted slightly, smiling, but not at the camera. He was looking just past the frame, tall with gentle features, Not classically handsome, but elegant. Earnest, like someone who never rushed his words. The caption read, Charles Marchand, July 3rd, 1955. I reached out and touched the glass. I had seen his face before. I couldn't explain where or how, but I knew this man, deep in my bones, in that quiet place where music lives before it's played. I followed the corridor down and stepped into the lounge. The room was empty, filled with golden afternoon light spilling through open windows. The scent of wood polish and dried roses lingered faintly in the air. And in the corner, just as Howard had said, stood a polished, upright piano. I approached it slowly. Its keys were slightly yellowed with time. I lowered the bench and sat. My fingers hovered just above the keys, but didn't touch. I didn't want to play. I wanted to listen. Somewhere deep in the walls, I could almost hear him. The echo of music, a fragile, melancholic chord, hanging in the air like a memory. And I whispered to no one, I came back for you. The piano didn't answer me, but something else did. I stayed there for a long while, seated on that old bench, as sunlight angled across the keys like a stage light frozen in amber. I didn't play. I just watched the room, as if expecting the past to peek around a corner and say, "Ah, you're early." And then I saw it. Tucked just beneath the edge of the piano, wedged between the bottom panel and the leg, was a sliver of paper, a torn corner, barely visible. I reached for it, and it gave easily under my fingers, releasing a thin puff of dust. It was a photograph, a small one, sepia-toned, folded down the middle from years of being hidden. A woman, in a soft summer dress, standing by the lake. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes looking off towards something outside the frame, as though listening to a sound she alone could hear. She looked like me. Not exactly, but close enough to steal the air from my lungs. The angle of the jaw, the curve of the brow, the stance. Deliberate, poised, a little wistful. And on the back of the photo, in neat, steady handwriting, "Find her again, July 2nd, 1955. My fingers trembled. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The piano, the windows, the faded wallpaper, all silent witnesses. I folded the photo gently, tucked it into my journal, and stood up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed in one of the guest rooms Howard offered, a high-ceilinged space with lace curtains and creaking floorboards. Everything smelled like lilacs and thyme. I lay awake with my notebook open beside me, trying to piece together what I knew. The music, the name, the hotel, the photo, the date. July 2nd, 1955. I flipped through the pages of my research notes. Then something clicked. A headline I'd scanned during a past project. Local pianist disappears. Last seen at Grand Ledge Hotel, July 2nd. The same date. Had Charles been looking for this woman when he vanished? Or was he looking for me? The thought was absurd. Romantic to the point of delusion. And yet, the more I resisted it, the louder it became in my chest. The next morning, I wandered the lakeshore path from the photo. Dew still clung to the grass, and the lake shimmered like a memory you weren't sure you'd really had. At the end of the path stood a small wooden bench, weathered but sturdy. I sat. The birds sang like they always had, probably for centuries. And somewhere inside that music, I heard it again, that melody. Not with my ears, but with something deeper. The notes were faint, barely there, like an echo from under the lake's surface. And suddenly, I understood. Charles hadn't disappeared. He had crossed over. Not to death, not to madness, but to a different time. A time before now. a time where this moment had already happened, and I was the missing piece. I whispered aloud, voice shaking, "I believe in you." And somewhere in the stillness, something shifted. The air changed. The light deepened. The wind stilled. The birds fell silent. Time paused. Just for a second. But it was enough.